Hey, all you nerds from the underground, it's at Chaz Simons here for another terrifying installment of Shocktober. I took the last couple of days off because I was really diving back into all of these great, terrifying tales. Super duper suspenseful stuff. That's right, all the alliteration I can muster, all for this. So let's get into it. My first story, my first pick, the titular story from this volume right here, Daddy Lost His Head. It's by Al Feldstein and Jack Common. It was really good. It had a lot of vibes. Well, maybe this one had a lot of vibes. I guess it might have stolen it from it, but it kind of reminded me of the Twilight Zone episode of Talking Tina, where the stepfather gets taken out by a evil doll. Well, sort of evil doll, I guess, in a way. In this story, there's a young girl who is beaten just viciously by her new stepfather, only because she looks too much like the wife's first husband. There's a old creepy neighbor next door who he calls a witch and has scared the girl away from. But as we later learn, as the story progresses, she might actually be a witch, but not necessarily an evil one. The mother dies due to anxiety disorder and also because of some terrible things that the stepfather's doing. And after she's gone, the stepfather's treatment of her only gets worse. Super duper worse. She finds a friend in the old witch next door who provides her with sweets and food and lets her pour her heart out and do all the nice things, and finally gives her a very special surprise. And this is a doll made out of candy, something that she swears she's never going to eat because it's too precious to her. And it's kind of looks like her stepfather. She even notes that it kind of looks like him, and the witch says, yeah, kind of, a little, which we know is a wink to there's something else going on there. One night she's sent to bed without dinner, and in her desperation, her hunger, her starvingness, she takes a bite out of the candy doll's arm, and that same night, the stepfather loses his arm in a terrible saw accident. Which, as you can imagine, this is no regular candy doll. This is a candy voodoo doll. The father is super upset when he learns that she's gotten this doll from the witch next door, and wants it taken away from her. But the girl is insistent that it is nothing evil and that it's not a witch's tool, and takes a big old bite of, you guessed it, the head. So, as you can imagine, Daddy Lost His Head becomes truer in more than one way. He loses it as far as his temper, and then he loses it in actuality as she chews the caramely chewy center of the candy doll's head. It was really good. Super crazy twist at the end, and it's always good to watch somebody who's so horrible to people get their comeuppance. So definitely check that one out. Jack Common is known for his romance origins, his romance comic origins, so he draws some pretty incredible looking women. But he was also known for his horror stories involving little kids, and in this you can definitely see the innocence in the girl's eyes as she's confessing what's been going on to her to the witch and her recovery over the fact, and she's strangely unmoved when she finds out what had happened to her stepfather after she took a big old bite off of this candy doll's head. That was actually his very first of the young child series of horror stories that he did at EC Comics, but it was super solid. Daddy Lost His Head. My next one, sticking with the theme of other head things, this is a story called Heads Up. It's from the Haunt of Horror, but I found it in Doctor of Horror. This is by Ghastly Graham Engels. He was known for doing a lot of Western comics originally, but when they moved him into the horror stuff at EC Comics, he really thrived, and people saw he was a true master of horror. This one kind of goes back to one of my earlier picks involving the Carnival Freak Show, except this time around it's set in a medical oddities tent, which I think is even better because none of the exhibits are alive to be exploited, and half the time they're fake. So, diving right into this one was written by Al Feldstein again, and drawn by Ghastly Graham Engels. It takes place, like I said, at a carnival, at the Medical Oddities tent. Fred is the person who runs the tent, and he brings everybody on a tour where you can see the three-legged boy, you could see the crazy head coming off of a skull, you could see weird animals that don't belong together, and he offers a $1,000 reward for anybody who can prove that these exhibits are fake. And the best part of all, once you get to the back, the crown jewel of the exhibit, the one that costs not just 5 cents, but 10 additional cents to view. That's right. The two-headed man, the only specimen to live with two heads all the way to maturity. And this thing looks gnarly in its big giant tube. There's two full heads just whoop, whoop, right next to each other, dead-eyed staring ahead. Not everybody goes for it, of course, because 10 extra cents, you already paid to get in. Why can't you see the whole thing? But as we find out, a lot of people do. He brings in quite a good amount of money, but his wife, Dora, does not like the medical oddities. As much as Fred loves him and the way that they make him money, and he kind of cares for him like they're his own kids in a weirdly preserved in a jar way, she has had it. She leaves him one night in a fury and says, "That's it, I'm done." And she goes to her side piece, a man named Hal. Hal is also working at the boardwalk, sort of in that carnival lifestyle, and decides, well, I've got a better plan. Let's kill him so that you, as the wife, will inherit all of these oddities. We could take this show on our own. We could be raking in the $23 a day, which I imagine at the time would probably equate to something quite a bit more for us today in 2020. She wants to go through with the plan, but is also just too grossed out by Fred at this point. Too grossed out by his obsession with these medical oddities, these things that pretty much have no business being exploited in this way, but this is the way that he's got to make his living. When she goes back after a night of light passion with Hal, she discovers that Fred isn't really paying attention to her, and that's because he had overheard all of these plans, all of this idea of killing him and taking all of his stuff, and he's not too pleased with it. Dora mistakes that absent-mindedness for just no emotion from him at all, and in a rage pushes the two-headed man, his prized jewel of an exhibit, over, smashing the jar and pouring him out onto the floor. She just relentlessly stomps on it, just crushes it, because she had enough of being second fiddle to this thing that's not even alive. It's in a pickle jar, essentially, a big giant pickle jar. And she smashes the heads right in front of Fred, just breaking his heart, breaking his spirit, and taking away his livelihood. But Fred gets a crazed look in his eye, as most people pushed to the brink do, grabs a big giant machete, and in the middle of the night starts working on a brand new exhibit. And the next day, as he reveals the 10-cent exhibit is still open, which we had just seen it get smashed, he peels back the curtain, and the two heads are not quite identical. They're not looking like they maybe came from the same body. There's a little bit of a stitch mark here, and you can see where maybe the machete didn't cleanly cut off Hal's head. That's right. He's sewn his wife's head, and her lover's head onto this one body in a ghastly, grisly way to exploit what they did to him. Super duper gnarly. If you like crazy, crazy things, both of these volumes are just packed to the gills with other great horror stories, but these two really stood out, and I wanted to keep the theme going of headless tales, or tales, scary stuff involving the heads of people. So those are my two Shocktober picks for today. We're going to keep it rolling all month long with all sorts of cool content, not just EC stuff, but I've got a few more of these books to work through, and I want to show them off for sure, and then I'm going to dig into my big giant artist editions where I'll be able to show off a few more of the interior panels because they're huge and I don't have to hold it up to the camera in a weird way. But yeah, so keep tuning in here on our YouTube channel, and make sure to follow us on Twitter @NerdsFrom for any more information about all the cool stuff that we'll be doing this month. You can follow me on Twitter as well. I'm @Chaz Simons. Thanks for tuning in. Don't get too scared out there.